When you come in contact with something harmful, the body responds. You sense it, that you then make choices that either promote the reestablishment of homeostasis, or you make choices that hinder it. I'm Heather Grzych, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrzych.com or on Instagram at heathergrzych. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. My human friends, I think many of us have a sense that how we eat impacts our health, and that if we eat well, we'll be healthier. And if we don't eat well, then we won't. But what does eating well actually mean? Because it may not be what you think it is. And is it possible that how you eat can impact how well your immune system functions? Let's be clear, I am not an immunologist. I have not looked at B cells or T cells or watched a macrophage chomp up a pathogen under a microscope before my very eyes. No, I studied Ayurvedic medicine. It's an indigenous medicine from the Indian subcontinent. It's been around for thousands of years, and while people didn't use microscopes back then, they used their eyes, they used their noses, they smelled things, tasted things, touched things, felt things with their hands, and they listened. They had to be really in tune with nature. They had to have really clear mind and sharp senses. They were not spending their evenings watching Tiger King or munching on their favorite prepackaged snacks. Much like animals can tell a lot from sniffing each other's behinds, there are some faculties that human beings have lost as civilization and technologies have grown. It's almost as if the more reliant we become on technology, the more we lose some primal sensory superpowers. And the next thing you know, we're all looking for a wearable device to tell us how we feel inside. I mean, there's a reason that people of indigenous tribes in the jungle can track animals better than someone from the Bronx could. We all seem to develop superpowers in the areas where we concentrate, and humans have done an excellent job concentrating on digital information rather than information in their bodies or in nature. A person might go an entire day without having any awareness of her body, or maybe until her neck hurts from sitting at the computer all day, or the stomach feels funny from drinking too much coffee earlier in the day. So as an Ayurvedic practitioner, I've been a guide and a witness to my fair share of people fasting, taking herbs, and drinking various substances for cleansing. And I've seen how different bodies react differently to the same substance. I've also seen how the same body reacts to the same substance differently in different seasons, or when placed in different contexts, like experiencing a lack of sleep or being in a dry climate. I've seen bodies react differently to drinking something like castor oil during a cleanse. For example, I've seen an overworked, overeating, intense 35-year-old female with a little bit of excess tissues developed on her body in the summer season in the luteal phase of her menstrual cycle, which is that time right before a woman gets her period, often a very intense time for women. And I've seen her react to drinking 2 ounces of castor oil in a much more dramatic way than a 60-year-old male athlete with dry skin and very little fat on his body. These bodies react differently for various reasons. And if you know the array of reasons that bodies might react differently to a given substance, then it becomes a little easier to predict the different reactions that might occur in a given body or group. It is the composite of these reasons that form the context. So the total experience forms the context. The context includes various behaviors involving your eating, your sleeping, your sensory intake, thinking, sex, what you eat, what season it is, what cycles are going on in the environment around you, whether they're nature cycles or work cycles, like your seasonal cycles at work, and also your emotional state, among many other reasons. So a dry body has less liquid to expel when it comes in contact with something heating. An inflamed body has, it's going to take everything so intensely. And depending on that level of inflammation, you might even get things moving in the wrong direction if that inflammation blocks the structure and the channels of the body. An overwatered, slimy body might drip and dull the fire element to the point of weakness. So how does a body get too dry? And how does a body get too wet? And how does a body get too inflamed? You may have heard me talk about this Ayurvedic principle of like increases like and opposites balance each other. So a practical example would be, say you ate a bunch of salty, spicy, sour, tomato, citrus, soups, meaty dishes, egg yolks, red wine. These are things that raise heat in the body. Say you ate like that for like 3 months. And then you do that in the middle of summer, and you've been working 12-hour days in an intense job, and you haven't been getting out into nature to decompress, and you've still been doing lots of other intense activities. Well, that's a lot of fire element. Possibly so much that it could strip your mucus layer from your gut lining, reducing that protective layer of the gut skin. And then your gut skin is extra vulnerable because that lubrication that it needs to tolerate the insults of digestion isn't there to protect it anymore. So if all of a sudden you were asked to eat some spicy kimchi in an already sort of heated up body, well, what do you think? Would that fiery fermented food feel good or bad? Would it create more heat or would it balance it out? So as opposed to eating something like oatmeal or a soft piece of young coconut with flesh that could soothe the savage beast of your gut lining. So this eating well part must take into context the condition of the tissues of the body. So let's dive into what does eating well actually mean. Just because I'm eating something organic, it doesn't mean I'm necessarily eating well. If it's grass-fed, too, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm eating well. I'm not saying that those things are not good. In fact, those are how I would prefer it as well, but it's not the whole picture. The human mind loves labels. It loves to hear that something is healthy, loves this word healthy. It loves to hear that something is healthy and say, yes, you'll be doing a good job if you eat this. This is how we were programmed in school. So if you memorize the correct answer, then you get a good grade. But this is not how the body works. Much to the chagrin of any scientific researcher who's ever designed the controls and variables in a study, it's really difficult to structure a study outside of a lab where things can't be as controlled as they can inside the lab. So in real life, there are many more variables influencing things than in a closed, sterile environment of a lab. It makes the accuracy of predictions challenging because there are many more potential data points in the circumstances influencing a situation. Even though you can get close, right? It's just not as exact as we want it to be. But your brain loves the outcome of these studies that tell you that this thing is good for you and this thing is bad for you, based on averages and means and majorities. Meanwhile, you have no idea if you are the average. You have no idea if you're the mean or the majority, or if you're an outlier. What if you're different than those people in some material way that would produce a different result? Unless someone knows the circumstances surrounding a specific body, the history, the patterns, the integrity of its structures, it's really impossible to predict how that body will react to a substance. There are things, though, that we believe are universally good or bad for people. So something we think is universally good for people would be water. Though apparently there are a few people on the planet who are even allergic to water. Can you imagine that? And people have allergies and reactions to all sorts of things. Even broccoli. Yes, broccoli. But the experts will tell you that broccoli is good for everyone. Broccoli is a great example because it shows you how this context piece is so important. Raw broccoli, eaten by a person with weak digestive power, is an example of doing something, somebody eating a food that isn't good for them in that moment. Not that it couldn't be good for them later, or that it doesn't have amazing things inside of it in terms of nutrients, vitamins and such. It's that their digestive power wasn't strong enough at that moment to eat it. And if your digestive power isn't strong enough to eat it, well, it's not going to break down a thick raw veggie very well. It doesn't mean that if your digestive power doesn't get stronger later, that then you could digest it well and it would be good for you. Yeah? So what happens when you eat a food that doesn't digest well? Improperly digested food actually can cause a whole array of health issues beyond just a simple upset stomach. Improperly digested food molecules can also create systemic effects in the body. if they get into the blood and into the lymphatic systems. So these food molecules that have been improperly digested can start to wreak havoc inside your body. It's actually one of the factors in certain conditions that would be considered autoimmune in nature, the sort of metabolic component to it, or poor metabolism. So if a food doesn't digest well because it was the wrong food for that time or for that body type, or in the wrong quantity, for example, too much, it can then become a toxic substance. So when you get a toxin in your body, any toxin, depending on the imbalance patterns existing in that moment, you might get a reaction of pain or movement or gas or spasms, tremors. That's like sort of one category of imbalance patterns. You might also get a different imbalance pattern, one that's of expulsion, where the body is angry and wants to kick it out. And you might also get one that doesn't do much at all and lets that toxin hang out in the body as long as it wants. Doesn't even do anything to it. Just says, hey, hang out. You could get a combination of these reactions too. And if in the process of this, the macro and the micro movement flow patterns of the body get thrown off from their normal directions, you might have even weirder stuff happen, like structural changes within the channels themselves and in the tissues of the body. You could have bodily fluids and even air moving in places that you don't want it. We call these different reactions of the body the dosha patterns of the body, or the vikruti, so the state of the doshas in the body. The nature of the biopsychohumoral imbalance, because these doshas are humoral, they're biological in nature, and there's also a psychological component to them. And they get impacted by that context that I mentioned earlier, which is a totality of all of the sensory inputs and behaviors and history that are converging in that body at that moment. So while your mind really, really wants to just look at a label and read that it's healthy and then go eat that thing and rest in the fact that it's doing something good, that's not really the key to being healthy. Being healthy takes paying attention to a little more detail. So in addition to what you're eating, it's important to understand the timing and the setting of eating as well. For example, with timing, if you eat and then go take an ice bath or do some intense exercise immediately afterwards, that's going to shift the body's resources away from the process of digestion. You've heard that you aren't supposed to go swimming until 30 minutes after eating. I mean, we all heard that when we were kids. You probably also heard in your yoga classes that you weren't supposed to eat for 90 minutes before doing yoga. Imagine trying to do a headstand or a very deep back bending or forward bending pose with a full belly. And, there's actually food in your belly getting pushed in different directions that you may not want that food going. So considering the setting as well, is it hot or is it cold in the room where you are when you're eating? And how is your body responding to that heat? I actually used to teach hot yoga classes, and though I wasn't demonstrating any poses, I was still sweating up a storm while I was teaching. And if I ate anything beforehand, I would notice that I would end up with a very serious stomach ache by the end of class, even though I wasn't even exercising. Similarly, have you ever tried to eat in an environment where you feel stressed, right? How does that go down? But we don't always think about these details, which really aren't too complicated. But as our minds get cluttered with so much other stuff in life, these very simple things you can pay attention to seem to feel difficult for people to put their attention on. Because if you've been spending less time focusing on your body experience and more time focusing on your thoughts, information, goals, plans, memories, your imagination, well then it's going to take some discipline and some getting used to and some letting go to refocus the energy back to the body, where it actually can be really simple, but you think it's hard because it's actually the rest of the stuff you're doing that's already hard and you don't feel like you have any capacity to do more. So you need to do less to focus on what matters. I want to share a story about a person I actually recently watched while making a decision on which beverage to buy in a store. So I was in a hotel and I was filling up my water bottle in a filtered water station in the store in a hotel. And this gentleman walks in, and he's a tall guy, kind of like big belly, walks in, kind of like shuffles in. He looks kind of I don't know, confused. And he's like, is there coffee in here? Says to me, I don't work there. I'm just, filling up my water bottle. He's like, is there coffee in here? So I look around and I'm like, I don't see any coffee. So then he doesn't know what he's going to have because he went in there for coffee. Maybe he was tired. So he starts looking in the drink refrigerator and there's all kinds of canned coffee drinks and plastic bottles of sodas and things like that. And he grabs this grape soda. And I said, well, if you're looking for coffee, it looks like there's these little, Starbucks, I think they were little cans of coffee that were cold with some kind of flavored stuff and cream in them. I pointed those out to him. So he was looking at the two choices. One is this grape soda that he pulled out, and the other was this coffee beverage thing that he also pulled out. And he's looking at them side by side, and he's like, grape or coffee? And I found that to be so interesting because, his brain just latched onto grape or coffee. And in reality, there's so much more to the story with each of those things that he's going to be taking into his body. There's carbonation in one and not carbonation in the other. One of them's in a plastic bottle and one of them is in a aluminum can. And there's also a bunch of chemicals that are different and a bunch of other ingredients that are different and sugar contents and all sorts of things like that. But his brain just went grape or coffee. And this is the thing. And this is actually very sad about where we are as humans right now, because we are so brand focused. We're so label focused. When you're label focused, you're more brand focused. It takes away dimensions of thought and dimensions of perception. It takes that away and it sort of trumps all other thinking when you focus on a brand. There's actually incredible fMRI studies about branding and how the branding for the Nike logo is actually, it evokes a similar response in the brain as to branding for looking at religious symbols. So branding and a mind that loves a brand or one word labels is actually, it's a mind that's asleep. Okay. And if you find yourself doing that, you really, really, really need to start paying attention a little bit more. But I promised to talk about what all this has to do with the immune system. Let's start with what your immune system is from an Ayurvedic perspective. There is no system of immunity in Ayurvedic medicine. There's no immune system in Ayurvedic medicine, exactly in the way that it's talked about in modern medicine. Instead, there are a set of circumstances and outcomes that exist to protect you when present and weaken you when they are not present. Your immunity is influenced by a collection of structures and fluids and functions of your body that help your body maintain homeostasis and reestablish homeostasis when the body has come in contact with something potentially harmful that disturbs the doshas or damages tissues. So assuming that you know what homeostasis means, but in case you don't know what homeostasis is, it's the sort of balanced state of the body that your body, when it fluctuates, as it will throughout the day or throughout life, and as it comes in contact with different things, your body has the ability to come back to a state of balance. And there are mechanisms in the body that bring it back to this place of balance, or what we call homeostasis. When you come in contact with something harmful, the body responds. You sense it, that you then make choices that either promote the reestablishment of homeostasis, or you make choices that hinder it. Okay, so you burn your hand, do you then keep it in the fire or do you take it out, right? Do you then just leave it? Do you run it under cold water? Do you rub sandpaper on it? Do you then hop in your car and go to work and it's in the sun, getting a sunburn? There's so many different things that could happen. So these choices may be to continue coming in contact with that harmful thing, or could be moving away from that harmful thing. It could perhaps be taking actions to counterbalance the effects, or taking actions to further exacerbate the situation. So your diet isn't just the food that you eat. Everything that your senses come in contact with are the diet that you consume. Even things that seem very subtle are impacting your state of balance in the body. And the question is, how aware are you of what's happening? And then when you notice that something has become harmful, what choices do you make at that point? I remember as a child, I would play certain ball games with my friends growing up, and we had a rule where if somebody made a mistake, say a bad serve in volleyball or a missed kick in kickball, we would give them a 1 bad. It's kind of like strikes in some way, like in baseball, except we would give them a 1 bad. And it was like, you got 1 shot to screw up, kind of like the idea of a grace period, or again, the strikes in baseball. You can make 1 mistake, 1 bad shot, 1 bad serve, but if you make it again, you lose your turn. And this is actually how the body works in response to your health decisions. A decision that promotes the harm of the body, done once, can be forgiven if the degree of seriousness is low enough. Like something that simply leads to an imbalance rather than a serious injury, right? So once that decision gets repeated, a pattern starts to become created. And that's how these behaviors lead to imbalance and how imbalance leads to disease. And it's a slippery slope, right? Because we humans have this weird thing where we can get used to things. We acclimate, then we build a tolerance. And before you know it, you're 3 years into something you knew was not great for you at the very beginning, and you kept doing it anyway, right? But the good news is that the same process that causes harm also causes health. If you repeat the beneficial behavior, many harmful things will just simply unravel. Making any unwise health choices affects the function of the body. It throws off the doshas, or like I said, the humors of the body, the blood, the mucus, the air. And it also creates toxins. It damages tissues. It interferes with the direction and rate of flow in things of the body. And it screws with your senses. And it can further disturb your mind. So then when these conditions exist, once you've already gotten out of balance, it's actually harder to make good choices because the mind is not even functioning well. A healthy body is really important if you also want to have a healthy mind. And like I said earlier, there is no exact correlation for this idea of an immune system in Ayurveda. There are some things that are similar. Okay, so like without you using a microscope, there's no visibility of the little war taking place between the cells in your body that has become the story of the immune system in modern medicine. I'm not saying the immune system isn't there. I just don't think the definition is fully complete. I don't think it's only about little warring entities inside the body and what enables them to be strong or weak or whatever. So if you're trying to enable this kind of radiant, robust health in your body, the kind of health that can tolerate insults, it can escort any harmful substances out with ease, and regenerate easily with good quality tissues, you can focus on the development of 3 characteristics in your body. And I'm going to give you the Sanskrit words for them. One of them you've probably heard. So the first one's prana. You've probably heard this as the life force energy, especially if you've been taking yoga classes. It's commonly used in the English language today. It comes from Sanskrit. And this prana animates and energizes your body. And you want to have moderate amounts of prana. The second thing that you want to have is tejas. This is a brilliant glow. It gives passion and vigor, and it allows the body to transform materials. Like how is it that you can eat an apple and that can be something that can be utilized by your body? Well, one of the subtle contributors to that is this essence of tejas that the body has. So you want passion and vigor as well. The third thing is ojas. Now, ojas is probably the concept in Ayurveda that has the closest correlation with the modern sort of, phrase of immunity. So what ojas is the perfect amount and protective quality to the body. So the perfect amount of the protective quality of the body. And it's a quality that's actually, it's really interesting. It's actually a liquid ooze. quality to the body. There's a little bit of a liquid ooze because it's considered the byproduct of good digestion and assimilation of nutrients by all tissues of the body. So that once all of the food digests well and all the materials have been made and the reproductive materials have been fed, then after that, you have this like leftover nutrients, these leftover nutrients that will protect the body, forming like a liquid layer. There's some juice to it that protects the body. So prana, tejas, and ojas. And you can get these three things by what and how you take into the body. You can also get them based on what the body does with those, what you take in the body and how well it can assimilate things. You can also get these three, the prana, tejas, and ojas, through setting intentions if you understand them. You want them in moderate amounts where they are needed in the body. For example, if you have an issue with ojas where it's depleted or it's what we say not in the spot of the body where it should be, there may be an imbalance of lubrication that affects your protective power of that part of your body. So does this mean if you have these things, then you are impervious to bodily insults and that you could sort of withstand any illness? Because obviously in Ayurveda, we spend a lot of time in what we call rasayana therapies, which are like rejuvenation therapies that build these things in the body, this prana, tejas, and ojas. But I don't think that people can withstand all injuries. I don't think we're immortal. So take an injury, for example. Sometimes a force is so great that it even permanently damages a body, a car accident or some big injury. There are also substances that can poison all human bodies in certain amounts, and there are pathogens that can take hold even in the healthiest body. But you sure are going to have an easier time dealing with all this if your body is able to quickly get itself back to homeostasis after the offending event. And your body will get back to homeostasis faster if you begin to understand the context that creates good health, real health. Not the I got an A on my biometric screening at work kind of health. That's just the distracting tip of the iceberg. No, I'm talking about getting the kind of health that produces healthy tissues, a healthy mind, good decisions, good company, and good offspring if you choose to have a child. Because anytime there's an illness, you can assume that the mind is also involved because the mind is used to choose certain behaviors and the mind believes that certain things are beneficial or harmful, sometimes even overriding bodily and sensory inputs. And these choices affect your body. I'm not saying you're going to get sick because of your thoughts, but I am saying that part of the reason you get sick is because of the choices you make. So considering all this, you could say that the effectiveness of the immune system is at least partially governed by the mind, though that's probably a whole separate discussion. And please don't start assuming that I'm an anti-vaxxer. I actually went to get a COVID booster this week. I believe that both germ theory and terrain theory coexist and that it's not necessary to choose a side. Vaccines, from what I understand, help train your body to deal with things that would potentially be far more harmful if you were to come in contact with the real thing. Do they go wrong? Yes, they can. Again, I'm not an immunologist, but my area of expertise, at least so far, is not in man-made or man-designed medicines. I'm not an expert in vaccines, and I need to evaluate the data in my own body in the same way that you have to. I also have to do the same thing when I think about letting a doctor give my child a vaccine. I don't simply do what the doctor recommends because it's convenient to get a vaccine then. If my kid has any pre-existing signs of imbalance in his body, maybe has inflammation, digestive issues, or he's got a cold or something like that, I'll often delay the vaccine to a later appointment when I feel more comfortable with him getting it. Though actually, while most vaccine reactions have been temporary for my son, he does have a nodule in his leg at the site of a shot that contained aluminum, a rare allergy, and that nodule hasn't gone away in 10 months. I suppose it's better than him getting tetanus in the event that he gets bitten by a dog. However, I won't be receptive to giving my child vaccines with aluminum in the future because if the aluminum was what his body was reacting to, well, why would I do that to him again? So we live and we learn. And we need to understand the context when making our decisions. Is the reaction to a vaccine any different than the reaction that the skin on my nose had at the sight of my metal nose ring when I was in college? Okay, so the metal for my nose ring apparently permanently dyed my skin green. Even when I wasn't wearing the nose ring, it looked like I was, because I had this, like, doctor called it a silver tattoo. So it's not always easy to know what your body's going to react to, but you live and you learn. I know I eventually got to the place where I decided that getting nose rings and tattoos wasn't really going to work for me any longer. And again, that's probably a whole separate episode. Now, I'm not saying that nose rings and tattoos are exactly like viruses and vaccines, because nose rings and tattoos aren't contagious like a virus is, at least not in the physical sense. You have to learn what your body needs. You have to understand how the seasons affect you. You have to get in touch with your digestive power and its function. Understand what a dosha really is and how you can influence these doshas. Notice how people and substances make you feel. You may not be crazy if your body feels something that someone else's doesn't. That should cause you to get more curious about it so you can understand why and make the best decisions for your unique body going forward. You could be crazy, though. It's very possible that you are being crazy. I would say go near to things that are beneficial and away from things that are harmful. Give yourself a one bad, just like my friends and I did. It was very nice that we did that to each other, playing sports. Give yourself a one bad, right? One shot to screw up. But if you fool yourself twice, shame on you. Balance your prana, your tejas, and your ojas. Let the food you eat and how you eat it, when you eat it, and how you react to it produce really good quality material for your body, enabling a wise mind and good bodily reactions. And damn it, get enough sleep, will you? A lot of people know that I got pregnant with my son on the first try and had him the year I turned 40. But a lot of people don't know that I first tried to get pregnant in my early 30s. The journey to motherhood was the most frustrating journey I have ever gone through. And that's what prompted me to write the book, The Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility, about the methods that ultimately helped me through that journey and helped me come out healthier, more aligned with nature, and frankly, more mystified on the other side of it. So if you're really stumped about the things that are within your power to change in your fertility and reproductive health, and you are curious about what you might be able to activate by getting more in touch with your body through the methods I used, then connect with me on Instagram, because there are definitely ways to go through the process in complete surrender. So find me on Instagram at Heather Grzych. That's at Heather, Grzych. Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, Grzych.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.